Hello, students. This is Miss Cohn. I'm here today to talk to you about characterization. This worksheet is going to be pretty easy. I want you to go ahead and go to your weekly page and open up the characterization worksheet, part 3 for In Cold Blood. And while I'm talking, please answer the questions as we move through today's talk and instructional video. In-person students obviously will do this in class, so you don't have to watch this instructional video. Virtual students definitely watch the instructional video. We're going to talk about characterization today, and then we're going to do a close read of page 192 through 195 of In Cold Blood and answer some questions about characterization. All right, so let me go ahead and get to my slideshow here for you. All right, so today's focus is characterization, and I want you to take a minute and pause the computer and see if you can answer this question, which is question 1 on your worksheet. What is characterization? Characterization is essentially how a writer develops a character. It can be direct or indirect. And it's really the vehicle that helps writers convey to their readers what a character is like. And writers do that in both direct and indirect ways. Okay, so there's 2 different kinds of characterization, direct and indirect characterization. Do you know the difference? Go ahead and try to answer the question under number 2 on the worksheet, and we'll go over it here in a minute. All right. Direct characterization is when a writer tells a reader exactly what a character is like. It's often how writers describe physical characteristics of characters. And then indirect characterization is when a writer shows the reader what a character is like through their actions, through their thoughts, through what they say, through what other characters say about them, or through how other characters react to those characters. So there are a lot of ways that writers indirectly show what a character is like and develop a character. All right, so what tools or literary devices do writers use to show the reader what a character is like indirectly? Again, go ahead and answer question 3, and we'll talk about it here in a minute. All right, so they use a lot of different things to show what a character is like indirectly. Sometimes they use figurative language, like imagery, personification, metaphors, and similes. Figurative language is the broad term for those things, where writers show with language rather than just flat out tell. Sometimes writers use literary devices like symbols to give us insight into characters. For example, the close reading we did last week of Perry's Dream tells us a lot about him, and not only helps us in a thing, it also tells us a lot about him. Sometimes they use allusions to hint at theme, or to hint at a character and develop characters to let us know what characters are like. Again, last week with the close read that we did of pages 92 and 93, you could argue that Capote used an allusion to the Adam and Eve story, the creation story, to show us more about what Perry Smith was like in terms of him not being able to resist temptation and him wanting what other people have and coveting what other people have. Sometimes writers make comparisons with foils, characters who are opposite to characters, to help highlight a character's features or personality characteristics or traits. Sometimes they use dialogue, what the characters say. And sometimes there are other things. I have symbols on there twice. I don't know why. All right. So what are some ways out there to describe characters? What are some ways you describe characters? Just jot down like 5 different ways. And we'll talk. This is question 4 on your worksheet. All right. The next slide will take you to a link of lots of different, 350 different ways to characters. You've got to scroll down a little here. But, certainly they list 50 different negative characteristic traits like aloof or angry or anxious or pessimistic or envious or judgmental or predatory or obsessive or vague or ridiculous. And then they list 175 positive character traits like independent, diplomatic, affectionate, agreeable, straightforward, sympathetic, self-confident, self-disciplined, gregarious, meticulous. So again, you could use this as a reference as a way, and some of these words are more sophisticated than the way some of my students typically describe characters. So sometimes it's nice to go to a list like this and find a different word choice. And actually, in my example, I used two from the negative character traits to describe Perry Smith after we do our close reading, and I'll explain that in a minute. All right, back to the slideshow. Lots of different ways to describe characters, okay? But to put it all together, so typically in AP type English class, teachers will ask you to describe a character using character traits and to explain it as a result of the writer's characterization of the character. So the reader should be able to determine how they arrived at the conclusion about the character, what tools or devices the writer used to help convey that message, and provide evidence of the writer doing this in the text and explain it. So another way to look at it is you basically saying Capote says this, okay? And then you basically saying he does this with the writing. These are the devices he uses, or he's doing this with his writing, and describe it. And he does it because of this. So he does it for this reason. Okay, so says this, does this because this is a useful way to thinking about answering these kinds of questions. Or even writing this kind of paper. If you were asked, for instance, to write a paper that explains how Truman Capote characterizes Perry Smith, for instance, and what devices he might use to convey that and why. Okay, says this, does this because this. Okay, it's a useful way to think about it. All right, so now I want you to get out your books and over them to page 192 to 195 of Ink Will Blood to prepare for our close reading. All right, so while we're reading, I want you to annotate the passage by identifying character traits of Perry Smith and note how Capote uses certain tools or devices to portray Perry as such. Okay, so I'm going to click on this, and in the side margins, you will want to know again how Perry Smith, how Truman Capote characterizes him. Name some traits and think about devices he uses. Okay. All right. It was early, not yet 9, and Perry was the first customer at the washateria. By the way, a washateria is like a laundry service, a self-service laundry. He opened his flat straw suitcase, extracted a wad of briefs and socks and shirts, some his, some Dick's, tossed them into a washer, and fed the machine, a lead slug, one of many bought in Mexico. Perry was well acquainted with the workings of such emporiums, having often patronized them, and happily, since usually he found it so relaxing to sit quietly and watch clothes get clean. Not today. He was too apprehensive. Despite his warnings, Dick had won out. Here they were, back in Kansas City, dead broke, to boot, and driving a stolen car. All night they had raced the Iowa Chevrolet through thick rain, stopping twice to siphon gas, both times for vehicles parked on the empty streets of small, sleeping towns. This was Perry's job, one at which he jumps to himself, absolutely tops. Just a short piece of rubber hose. That's my cross-country credit card. On reaching Kansas City at sunrise, the travelers had gone first to the airport, where, in the men's lavatory, they washed and shaved and brushed their teeth. 2 hours later, after a nap in the airport lounge, they returned to the city. It was then that Dick had dropped his partner at the washateria, promising to come back for him within the hour. So it seems as though he is not relaxed right now. So I may put that in a side margin. Perry equals not relaxed, maybe anxious. Um, all right. When the laundry was clean and dry, Perry repacked the suitcase. It was past 10. Dick, supposedly off somewhere, hanging paper, was overdue. He sat down to wait, choosing a bench on which, at arm's length away, a woman's purse rested, tempting him to snake his hand around inside it. But the appearance of its owner, the burliest of several women now employing the establishment's facilities, deterred him. Once, when he was a running wild child in San Francisco, he and Chinkid, Tommy Chan, Tommy Lee, had worked together as a purse-snatching team. It amused Perry, cheered him up to remember some of their escapades. Like one time we sneaked up on an old lady, really old, and Tommy grabbed her handbag, but she wouldn't let go. She was a regular tiger. The harder he tugged one way, the harder she tugged the other. Then she saw me and said, help me, help me. And I said, hey, lady, I'm helping him, and bopped her good. Put her on the pavement. 90 cents was all we got. I remember exactly. We went to a chink restaurant and ate ourselves under the table. Things hadn't changed much. Perry was 20-odd years older and 100 pounds heavier, and yet his material situation had improved not at all. He was still, and wasn't it incredible, a person of his intelligence, his talents, and urgent dependent, so to say, on stolen coins. That's an interesting comparison here. I feel like this is a metaphor here where Perry compares himself to an urchin dependent. So I think urchin is child. Urchin equals child. Okay, so interesting. I feel like that's an interesting way to describe Perry's dependence on Dick. A clock on the wall kept catching his eye. At 10:30, he began to worry. By 11, his legs were pulsing with pain, which was always with him a sign of approaching panic. Bubbles in my blood. I feel like that is a good line to mark up for imagery. It says something about Perry's anxiety. So if I were taking notes in the side margin, I might mark up things like that. Okay. He ate aspirin and tried to blur at least, the brilliantly vivid cavalcade gliding across his mind, a procession of dire visions. Dick in the hands of the law, perhaps arrested while writing a phony check, or for committing a minor traffic violation, and found to be driving a hot car. Very likely, at this very instant, Dick sat trapped inside a circle of redneck detectives, and they weren't discussing trivialities, bad checks, or stolen automobiles. Murder was the topic, for somehow the connection that Dick had been so certain no one could make had been made. And right now, a carload of Kansas City police were on their way to the washateria. But no, he was imagining too much. Dick would never do that, spill his guts. Think of how often he had heard him say, they can beat me blind. I'll never tell them anything. Of course, Dick was a blowhard. His toughness, as Perry had come to know, existed solely in situations where he unarguably had the upper hand. Suddenly, gratefully, as he thought of a less desperate reason for Dick's prolonged absence, he'd gone to visit his parents, a risky thing to do, but Dick was devoted to them, or claimed to be. And last night, during the long rainy ride, he had told Perry, "I'd sure like to see my folks. They wouldn't mention it. I mean, they wouldn't tell the parole officer, do anything to get us in trouble. Only, I'm ashamed to. I'm afraid of what my mother would say about the checks and going off like we did. But I wish I could call them, hear how they are." However, that was not possible, for the Hickok home was without telephone. Otherwise, Perry would have rung up to see if Dick was there. Another few minutes, and he was again convinced that Dick was under his rest. His leg pains flared up, flashed to his body, and the laundry odors, the steamy stench, all at once sickened him, picked him up, and propelled him out the door. He stood at the curb, and again, all of this is imagery as well. Imagery to show Perry's increasing anxiety about Dick's absence. He stood at the curb, retching like a drunk with the dry heaves. Kansas City. Hadn't he known Kansas City was bad luck and begged Dick to keep away? Again, simile to show Perry's anxiety Kansas City. Hadn't he known Kansas City was bad luck and begged Dick to keep away? Maybe now, Dick was sorry he hadn't listened, and he wondered, what about me? With a dime or two and a bunch of lead slugs in my pocket, where could he go? Who would help him? Bobo? Fat chance. But her husband might. If Fred Johnson had followed his own inclination, he would have guaranteed employment for Perry after he left prison, thus helping him obtain a parole. But Bobo wouldn't permit it. Bobo is his sister Barbara, by the way. She had said it would only lead to trouble and possible danger. Then she had written to Perry to tell him precisely that. One fine day, he'd pay her back, have a little fun, talk to her, advertise his abilities, spell out in detail the things he was capable of doing to people like her, respectable people, safe and spug people, exactly like Bobo. Yes, let her know just how dangerous he could be, and watch her eyes. Surely that was worth a trip to Denver, which was what he'd go to Denver to visit the Johnsons. Fred Johnson would stake him a new start in life. He'd have to, if he ever wanted to be rid of him. Then Dick came up to him at the curb. "Hey, Perry," he said, "you sick?" The sound of Dick's voice was like an ingestion of some potent narcotic, a drug that, invading his veins, produced a delirium of colliding sensations, tension and relief, fury and affection. That's an interesting simile used to show Perry's feelings about his relationship with Dick. It's like an addict obsession. It's obsessive. Yeah, obsessive is a good word to describe that. Dick grinned and said, "Come on, we're eating again." But explanations were in order, apologies too. And over a bowl of chili at the Candy City hash house that Dick liked best, the Eagle Buffet, Dick supplied them. "I'm sorry, honey, I knew you'd get the bends. Think I'd be tangled with a bull. But I was having such a run of luck, it seemed like I ought to let it ride." He explained that after leaving Perry, he had gone to the Markle Buick Company, the firm who had once employed him, hoping to find a set of license plates to substitute the hazardous Iowa plates on the abducted Chevrolet. "Nobody saw me come or go. Marky used to do a considerable wrecked car trade." "Sure enough, out back there was a smashed-up DeSoto with Kansas tags. And where are they now?" "On our buggy, pal." Having made the switch, Dick had dropped the Iowa plates at a municipal reservoir. Then he'd stopped at a filling station where a friend worked, a former high school classmate named Steve, and persuaded Steve to cash a check for $50, which was something he'd not done before, rob a buddy. Well, he'd never see Steve again. He was cutting out of Kansas City tonight, this time really forever. So why not fleece a few old friends? With that in mind, he called on another ex-classmate, a drugstore clerk. The take was thereby increased to $75. Now, this afternoon, we'll roll up to a couple hundred. I've made a list of places to hit, 6 or 7, starting right here, he said, meaning the Eagle Buffet, where everybody, the bartender and waiters, knew and liked him and called him Pickles in honor of his favorite food. Then Florida, here we come. How about it, honey? Didn't I promise you we'd spend Christmas in Miami, just like all the millionaires? Okay, so we've marked it up a little bit for some character traits we saw and some things we saw Truman Capote doing in his uh, writing in that passage that would contribute to the characterization of Perry Smith. Okay, now I want you to answer question 5. I want you to take a minute, answer question 5. How does Truman Capote characterize Perry Smith in the passage on page 192 through 195? Describe characteristics, provide evidence of the devices Capote uses to convey these characteristics to the reader, and explain. I want you to stop a minute, okay? I want you to think about this. I want you to think about the annotations we made, and I want you to think about the race strategy, because, of course, when you're answering short answer questions, you want to use the race strategy and answer this question. We'll talk in a minute. Sorry about that. An announcement interrupted my video. I'm making it here at school today. Okay, so here is a sample response to this kind of question. And I want to sort of point out some features of the sample response once we're finished reading it, okay? But if I were answering the question that you were just asked to answer in paragraph 5, okay, or in question 5, about the passage from pages 192 through 195 of In Cold Blood, here's how I might respond. Truman Capote characterizes Perry Smith as anxious and obsessive in the passage from pages 192 through 195 of In Cold Blood. He uses imagery and a metaphor to help characterize Perry Smith indirectly through Perry's thoughts. For example, these lines from the excerpt are an example of imagery. A clock on the wall kept catching his eye. At 10:30, he began to worry. By 11, his legs were pulsing with pain, which was always with him a sign of approaching panic. Here, Capote uses imagery to show Perry Smith's anxiety about Dick not returning to pick him up from the laundromat, with Perry repeatedly staring at the time and his leg pain, which has repeatedly signaled his nervousness throughout the book. I don't know if you caught that or not, but it's definitely there. Then, later on in the excerpt, whoops, I've got an extra comma there. Oops, go back, pretend that extra comma isn't there. Capote portrays Smith as being obsessive, using a simile to describe his relationship with Dick. Perry's thoughts are as follows. The sound of Dick's voice was like an injection of some potent narcotic, a drug that, invading his veins, produced a delirium of colliding sensations, tension and relief, fury and affection. Here, Capote compares Perry's feelings for Dick like a drug. Regardless of whether or not it's bad for Perry, he is drawn to it. Okay, so again, the whole pattern. Truman Capote says this, he does this, and he does it to show this or because of this. Yes. Also, you can see the race strategy in here. Restate the question, answer with accuracy, cite evidence, and explain it. I've done that, and the question asked for a couple examples from the passage we read, so I did that. All right, so now it's your turn, okay? What I want you to do is make sure you turn in that worksheet because we've essentially done the characterization worksheet together. But what I want you to do is I want you to find another passage, not anything from 192 through 195 in part 3 of In Cold Blood. And in discussion question number 5, you're going to find another place where Truman Capote uses certain devices to characterize Perry Smith in a certain way and explain it. And then for question 6, you're going to do the same thing we essentially just did with Perry Smith, with another character and another passage from In Cold Blood. So essentially, you are going to redo what we just did in question 5 on the worksheet in discussion question number 5, only picking another passage from part 3, and you're going to explain how Truman Capote characterizes Perry Smith in that passage. You're going to provide character traits, you're going to provide devices, and you're going to explain it. And then you're going to do the same thing in discussion question 6 with another character in part 3 and a different passage. All right, if you have questions, feel free to email me at scone@perryschools.org. All right, thank you.